Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful morning, the 17th of March at 2026, 26 minutes are past the hour of 9 a.m. It's a beautiful, bright and sunny morning down in Kampala here. And we are back to, as had promised, to bring you the latest stuff from the world of football. It's going to be quite. It's going to be all about the UEFA Champions League because that does return for the round of 16 reverse fixtures following the different results from the first legs last week. And the stage is set. I do not think it does get more important than it is tonight because um, because um, because it's the UEFA Champions League. It's the premier competition of UEFA. So every team that plays in it wants to win it. Only a few teams can win it, and things like that. So that is what signifies at the moment. But you'll allow me have our audios tested and make sure everything checks out before we even proceed any further for purposes of this broadcast. So and then so it's going to be plenty of action coming our way today. We have very important games. We have very important games in terms of the Champions League, and the significance of that is with the deficits from the first leg. Can teams complete comebacks? Are we going to see any surprises, or it's just going to be teams that came out on top from the first legs, basically sitting it out? We do love a night of drama, and in football, a night of drama is for example, what we did observe with Juventus and Galatasaray during the playoffs of the UEFA Champions League, that Galatasaray won the first leg by 5 goals to 2. Then Juventus won this reverse fixture by 3 goals to 2 by 3 goals to 0 in the 90 minutes, which sent the game into extra time before Galatasaray went through when they scored those 2 goals. So that's the kind of I think what would pass for a beautiful night for me of football, not something that is very straightforward in terms of Real Madrid. And I do support Real Madrid, but I wouldn't want to see Real Madrid go at the Etihad Stadium and win by 4 goals to 0, by 2 goals to 0. No, I'd want Manchester City to present a challenge, to almost threaten Real Madrid's existence in the competition, to give them quite the night of football, to say, you may have beaten us at the Bernabeu, but it's not going to be a walkover at the Etihad Stadium, And same applies for PSG. And I like PSG because of the style of play, because of the kinds of players they have. I do like Luis Enrique as a coach. So I wouldn't want it to be straightforward for them to go to Stamford Bridge and win by 2 goals to 0 or lose by 2 goals to 1. That's normal. That's almost a given that it could play out that way. Prime Ronaldo says hi. Hi, Prime Ronaldo. Why are you joining us from this beautiful morning? So I wouldn't want to see it play out that way. So in other words, I'd love for Chelsea to lead that game by 2 goals to 0 by halftime. And then in the second half, we get a game on. Nice to see you too. Where are you joining us from? Robert Kesakos is my name, and I'm coming to you live from Kampala, Uganda. But thank you so much for joining us. Kindly like the podcast. But also, if it's your first time here, please consider subscribing to the channel. So I want to see Bodo Glimt. I want to see Sporting Lisbon leading that game by 2 goals to 0 by halftime. And then when we get to the second half, let them find the third, and it's 3-on-3 on aggregate. Then very late in the game, maybe Bodo Glimt score what is a consolation for that particular game, but it is the goal that takes them through. That's drama. That's a close contest. That's close for Bodo Glimt to being close to being knocked out, while it is close for Sporting CP to almost going through, but then just not enough. So I don't want it straightforward. the beauty of football, beyond the results and the formalities of starting 11s and tactics, is within the goals and when they are going in on either side and not just one-way traffic. But for a knockout competition like the UEFA Champions League, it does help to create a bit of drama. We may not appreciate it the way Barcelona knocked out PSG in 2017 when they beat them by 6-1 after losing the first leg by 4-0 at Parc des Princes, but we know we love something. Look at the Arsenal game. Good morning, Prince Nkosi. Good morning. You say straight win for Bodo Glimt. I mean, they have painted themselves in that sort of picture, in that sort of mold, that they'll beat anybody that comes through their path. And I think they've gone on to win. It's now what? They've won 5 consecutive games in the UEFA Champions League. That is ever since match day 7 of the league phase. They beat Man City 3-1. They went on to beat Atletico de Madrid 2-1. They beat up against Inter Milan by 2-1 and 3-1 respectively, home and away. And now they beat up against Sporting CP by 3-0. So I understand that there's that expectation, but I wouldn't want to see Bodo Glimt go unchallenged. You know, I wouldn't want to see teams stoop so low just because Bodo Glimt are looking brilliant, and they are looking brilliant, and that's all credit to them. I've already said that I think it's increasingly becoming tough for teams to go away to Bodo Glimt. You know, knowing it's artificial tough, they have that confidence about them. They have that aura of winning, the momentum of you know, being a part of a winning team. They are almost fearless. They're confident about themselves, not because they are confident that they can win it, but they are they almost play like young kids. You know, when you watch young kids play football, they're not fearless. They do not know what the implications are for going in hard on a tackle. They do not know the implications of taking on a full-grown defender. No, they do not care about that. They just bring the ball to you. So that's how Bodo Glimt are behaving in a way, or that's how at least I view them. And that's been very, very interesting. So whereas we all love the story of the underdog in football, it does not be, it ceases to be the story of the underdog if they're going on to win every little game that they find themselves in. It has to be scrappy at one point. And we say, oh, they nearly bowed. For example, by the end of match day 6, I think they had drawn against Borussia Dortmund by 2-2. They're on the verge of the exit at the league phase of the UEFA Champions League. And I do not think there's any of us that would have imagined that they were going to beat up against Manchester City and Atletico de Madrid and find the slot in the round of 16. Sorry, in the playoffs of the UEFA Champions League. I do not think many of us may have imagined that. But because it's football, it's more like a life's equalizer. Anything can happen, you know? Because in football, whether you have a team laden of stars and the other team has a team laden of nobodies or little known people, is that it's 11 against 11. And whoever has the better day in office comes out on top, oftentimes. TT Vision says Arsenal is very close to the promised land. I think that's a wider conversation, but I'm sure it's the kind of statement that you made. It's one that Arsenal fans keep dreaming of. They keep hoping for. For all the time that they've spent without winning, I think it would mean a centuries of joy and love if they were, for example, to win the quadruple. They are still involved in all 4 competitions. And to be fair to them, they have done what it takes to still be there. There's a lot of work for them to be done. And I was speaking in a forum yesterday, a football forum, and I was saying the kind of challenge that Arsenal have on their hands is quite enormous, because over the weekend they were playing in the Premier League and they had to grind that one out against Everton. We also how the goals came in, and very late on in the game, in the 89th minute and then the 97th minute. And then straight away, they go to the UEFA Champions League against a Bayer Leverkusen side that more or less had a good game against Bayern Munich on Saturday. At that game kicked off at 5:30 p.m. It ended in a 1-1 draw, with Bayern Munich having 9 players left on the pitch after the sending off of Nicolas Jackson and eventually Luis Diaz. And I was watching a clip of them, doing the goalkeeping drills with their young goalkeepers from the academy and things like that, because they have all their senior goalkeepers out through injury. So I saw a very decent Bayer Leverkusen side. So they faced that one in the UEFA Champions League. So the demands or the task at hand is quite different. And then in the immediate aftermath of that, they have a final to play against Manchester City in the Carabao Cup final. That's a different competition. That's silverware on the line for them, as it is for Manchester City. And then subsequent to that, in the aftermath of the March international break, I think around the 4th and 5th of April, when they return, they'll be playing in the quarterfinals of the FA. Now, their responsibilities are not any different from those of Manchester City. They are all on the same trajectory. However, the difference is that Arsenal are leading the Premier League table, and with 9 points, of course, with Man City having a game in hand. And I don't know if you've noticed it or you've looked around, but every time I've seen a former Arsenal player or a legend, they're all as skeptical as majority of their fans are. Not skeptical that they're not going to win it, but they are not yet in the place where they can speak with that absolute confidence, that they are going to win it. And you say 8 more games, let us dream just... Let us dream. I just want the Premier League. That's TT Vision. I understand where you're coming from, but I was watching. I think Thierry Henry was on Sky Sport, and I've watched Martin Keown. I think he's often featured on TalkSport and some other TV shows. I've watched Ian Wright. I've listened in to the likes of Charles Watts. He's a journalist, formerly with Goal and I think Court Offside and Football.London, etc., etc. I've listened to the likes of James Bench. I've listened to quite a number of them. And those that are either former Arsenal players or journalists or fans in general and things like that. Whereas the position they are in sort of would give you the absolute confidence. I think many of them, just like I and you, have lived around the block long enough to know that it's not over until it is over. And the reason for that is because not too far back ago, Jurgen Klopp said this, that when Manchester City are chasing you down in the title race, they're like a wild dog. They are relentless. Now, I understand it's not the same Manchester City that we've seen over the last couple of years, who have gone on to win maybe 13 out of 15 matches or 13 out of 14 matches in the run into the finishing line of the Premier League title race. They are not that. And the reason for that is that I think Pep Guardiola has been a bit caught off guard this time around. Why? Not because he's no longer good enough, but for majority of his coaching career, managers have always reacted to him setting precedent, for him setting the pace. In other words, his style of football dictated how teams reacted, dictated how teams went about their own games, dictated how teams tweaked their own play. So in other words, whenever he invented something in the game of football, it's almost like the others were months behind and they had to play catch up. But this time around, he's the one that is having to play catch up. He's the one that is having to fit in. Look around the Premier League particularly. You have you have teams largely playing with low blocks or mid blocks. Teams leveraging everything they can with set piece plays, whether it's a long throw in, whether it's a corner kick, whether it's a free kick. And the other day, which was I think yesterday morning, I was giving people the statistics that Arsenal have scored 22 goals from set piece play. and that's free kicks, penalties, throw-ins, and corner kicks. Now, and next to them, I think is Chelsea, and what's the other team? I forget the other team, but the second and third team have scored 19 goals. It's Newcastle and Chelsea, and then you have Leeds, Bournemouth, Manchester United, teams that follow with more goals from set pieces. So, in a way, overall, there's a sudden feeling about change of the game. There's a sudden bit of a shift from how teams have ordinarily been playing. And I think Pep Guardiola is playing catch up to that. But then the other factor is that he no longer has the quality of players, like TT Vision outrightly mentions it, that Manchester City without KDB and Gundogan would have cooked. He says Man City with KDB and Gundogan would have cooked Arsenal. So it's also a team in transition. However, I do not want to over-exaggerate the importance of their transition. Why? Because in that squad, Pep Guardiola still has more than 10 players that have experience winning a Premier League title or even winning a league title. Gianluigi Donnarumma has not done it in the Premier League, but he's done it elsewhere. At PSG, when you look at Joško Vardiol, of course he's absent, but he's played a part in this season. He's currently out through injury. Ruben Diaz, Nathan Ake, John Stones has spent quite a bit of time out through injury, but he's played his part for whenever he's been available. Matthias Nunes, Nico O'Reilly, Rodri in that midfield, Bernardo Silva. I think Bernardo Silva is in his 9th season with Manchester City. When you look at a player like Jeremy Doku, who I think joined them, was it in 2023? So he has experience winning a Premier League title. But Erling Haaland has experience winning a Premier League title. Phil Foden has experience winning a Premier League title. Mateo Kovacic, who has spent, unfortunately, I think the larger part of the season out through injury, has been out through injury. But the point I'm trying to make is that whereas they are a team in transition, and it is true, I don't want us to over-exaggerate the idea of them being a team in transition, because their transition has sort of been phased. You have had players like KDB, Joao Cancelo, Stefan Ortega, Ederson Morales, Kyle Walker, leave at different points. And of course, you go back to the Emerick Laporte, the Riyad Mahrez, etc., Ilkay Gundogan, and things like that. They've gone out in a bit of a phased manner. But also look at how they've well invested in that squad. Over the last 4 transfer windows, summers and Januaries inclusive, look at how they've spent, bringing in players like Victor Reus, who is currently out on loan to Girona, Kushanov, Omar Mamush, and who was the other player that they brought in at that time, with the likes of Omar Mamush. But look at Tijan Reinders, look at Ryan Cheki, look at Donnarumma, James Trafford, look at Antoine Semenyo this January, and Mark Kehi, and all that sort of composition. You know, it's and Nico, yes, it is Nico Gonzalez was the name I was looking for. So they brought in quite a chunk of players, and they are good players. So they are, in a way, a team in transition. So there's that bit. But we all know that judging them by their own standards, because we judge Manchester City by the standards they've set themselves. And when the conversation shifts on the other side about Arsenal, when people are criticizing them on being boring or what, it's because they've seen an electric Arsenal side. Go back to 2021, 2022, then the subsequent season, 2022, 2023, and then 2023, 2024. You just need to look at that Arsenal side of those 3 seasons and know that there's been quite a shift between that Arsenal side and the Arsenal that you saw last season and the one you're watching this season. It's just a manager evolving or learning or understanding that I did this and these were the results. Maybe I need to tweak that, and maybe the game is going in this direction. And I remember reading an article or a blog by some European journalists who are saying that in Europe, Arsenal being looked at as the benchmark of the pace setters for football and projects around Europe. So your perception about them in that sense could sort of shift. But we all can acknowledge that Manchester City are not what they've been over the last couple of years. So TT Vision says yes, but they are lost. Sorry, you say yes, but they lost their X factor. And in this race, the smallest details can make a huge difference. No doubt, no Dorman, and withdraw the game. Okay, that's a factor. Then Raymond Kangumba says, hi, Barcelona versus Newcastle United, Ramsdale, Hall, Trips, Bruno Guimaraes, Jolinton, Sandro Tonali, and Anthony Gordon, and Wissa to win it for Newcastle, and now from Bray. Yes, we'll get to talk about Barcelona, but fortunately, their game comes tomorrow, which is Wednesday, in the early kickoff at 8:45 p.m. So we'll have ample time to go through the Barcelona game. But thank you so much, Raymond, for that submission. Then also, TT Visual says also the fullback City have now a downgrade, no doubt, but it Nunes and O'Reilly and not better than Cancelo and Walker. That's true, but for players like Cancelo, he's been gone for quite some time, and even ever since Manchester City signed Matheus Nunes from Wolverhampton Wanderers, he's played more games as a right back than he is played as a midfielder. In other words, Pep Guardiola shifted him entirely to play right back. That's so there's no longer an excuse about that, because he's had how many transfer windows for him to make a decision about the right back, and he's not changed his mind. The reason as why we were overly critical of him last week when they lost to Real Madrid by 3-0 at the Santiago Bernabeu was because he's had Matheus Nunes predominantly play for him right back throughout the course of the season. Then he gets to that game and he decides it's Kushanov that is going to be playing in that role. And then he decides that in this midfield trio, essentially where you have Rodri, Bernardo Silva, and Ryan Cherki or Phil Foden, I'm just going to go and throw in Savinho there. And it did not work out. So, he sort of made things a bit difficult for himself there. Cancelo is doing really good for Barcelona right now. Yeah, he did score over the weekend as they beat up against Sevilla by 5-2. So he's doing okay there. So that takes us straight into, okay, so we know what it means mathematically. But yesterday, I was watching a clip from one of the guys I admire the most in this kind of work. He's called Aldrin Suga Senior. He normally does what he calls the Arsenal calculator. And he was saying, Arsenal have 7 games left to play, and Manchester City have 8 games left to play. And I remember, when you're quick to correct people before you listen to the whole story, you oftentimes bound to get it wrong. So he said, in their remaining 7 games, all Arsenal need is to win 4 games and draw 3 games, and which essentially would give them 15 points. And then he went on to say, Man City would need to win all their 8 games for them to be on level, on the same number of points with Arsenal by the end of the season, because both teams would end up at 85 points. However, currently as things stand, Arsenal have a better goal difference. So in that better goal difference, Arsenal would win the league. You remember the 2012 Premier League title was won on goal difference because Manchester United and Manchester City were all tied on 89 points following victories on the final day, when Manchester United beat up against Sunderland while Manchester City were beating up against Queen's Park Rangers. Now, with that said, he then comes back to, not to self-correct, but to sort of paint his picture better. And he says, Manchester City cannot win all their 8 games if the assumption is that Arsenal make 3 draws and win 7 games. So in other words, Arsenal's game against Man City would possibly end in a draw, and then it would mean that they finish at 85 points and Man City come in with 83 points. But anyways, those are all assumptions. But he tries to paint a picture where a lot of people want to imagine it, that in an ideal world or in a perfect world, that Man City win at least 7 out of their 8 games, and then Arsenal have a couple of draws in there, let's say 3 draws, for which they drop 6 points and things like that. So he tries to imagine what most Arsenal non-well-wishers or non-fans are thinking about them. Because you remember last season, particularly, and not just last season, but also you have to go back to the 2015-2016 season. A lot of times, teams hoped or kept thinking, maybe it was even against hope, that this stable leader, who they were not so convinced about or sold about because they thought there were other better teams in the league at the time. 2016 was Leicester City and last season it was Liverpool. That suddenly, these teams that people reimagined or imagined to be better were going to catch up, or that the leader was going to drop points. So there's sort of that anxiety about Arsenal fans. And for Arsenal fans, of course, it's based on the experiences that they've had in trying to chase down the Premier League title. But usually when it's your year, it is your year. And regardless of what happens, you're going to win it. That's how Leicester City won it. When Tottenham Hotspur were chasing them down, they went and led by Chelsea game. Went and led a game against Chelsea by 2-0, and then Eden Hazard scored a brace, and it was 2-2. You remember that game when Arsenal beat Leicester City by 2-1, and they came back in the title race. But then subsequently they lost their way. So look at Liverpool last season. Every time Liverpool faltered and you thought they were going to catch up on them, their opponents, largely Arsenal, equally faltered. And when it was Arsenal versus Liverpool at Anfield, I understand the title was already gone. It was a 2-2 draw. So you may have that. None of us is tall enough to see what is going to happen tomorrow. And that's why most of it is wishful or based on assumptions to say, look here, if this happens, that could happen. If this happens, it would mean this, and blah, 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 because why? We are all basing on assumptions. But it is no secret that Arsenal have put themselves in a good position. Like I keep concluding, it's their title to lose, because they know what is required. They know that in their next league outing, which is going to be in quite a while, which will be, I think, against AFC Bournemouth, they'll have to win that one, and then they will go away to Manchester City. So I, for one, am of this school of thought that, for example, and this is in Premier League context, if Arsenal beat up against AFC Bournemouth, and the subsequent Premier League game they beat up against Manchester City, then that is when they will sort of seal the title. Not mathematically, but psychologically speaking, or figuratively speaking, that if they win their next 2 Premier League games, which will be against AFC Bournemouth and Manchester City, that's the story. So, Arsenal fans, that's over to you to think about. Do you think it is doable? Of course it is doable. But I also keep remembering that the cup final next weekend between Man City and Arsenal in the AFL Cup at Wembley will sort of set the precursor, will be a precursor to that Premier League game at the Etihad Stadium. Whoever comes out on top in that weekend final, in terms of picking the silverware. On the other side, in others, let's go with the imagination. If Arsenal win it at Wembley, Manchester City will go back and sit around their circle of tables, because that will be way long after the international break. And oh Lord, they will be desperate for revenge when they take on Arsenal at the Etihad Stadium, because one, the Premier League title will still be at stake. But more importantly than that, or more important than that, will be the idea of seeking revenge against a team that just cost them a piece of silverware. And if the case is vice versa, if Manchester City do beat Arsenal in the finals of the Carabao Cup, as they did in 2018, by the way, for those of you that do not remember, they beat Manchester City beat Arsenal by 3 goals to 0. Goal scored by Sergio Aguero, Vincent Company, and David Silva. You'll find that Arsenal will go will go into that fixture at the Etihad Stadium with the spirit of revenge, of saying, yeah, we just conceded the EFL Cup to you recently at Wembley. We're not conceding the league title to you. We're going to fight tooth and nail to make sure we win it here. We will put bodies on the line. So that will be the spirit that propels Arsenal into that game. So, and that's the significance of it. And by the way, maybe briefly by extension, they've not won this competition since '93. Yes, they've played a couple of finals, and yet they've not been successful in it. In those finals, they've played one in 2018, in which they beat Man City, who won it 4 consecutive times. That's 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. And yeah, so they have that sort of a record about them. So anyways, guys, let's move on to the UEFA Champions League. But since we're talking about Manchester City, allow me start with the Man City versus Real Madrid game. We know that the first leg ended in defeat for Manchester City by 3 goals to 0. And then they returned to weekend action and shared the spoils with West Ham United in a 1-1 draw at the London Stadium. Then, of course, Pep Guardiola, fairly so, was faced with all sorts of criticism. Real Madrid, I think, surprised many of us. Whereas we all know that they have a knack for turning up the heat, for switching it on when it comes to a UEFA Champions League night. I do not think many had imagined that a 3-0 victory against a slightly better Manchester City, in as far as the larger context of the season has been, would come out with that emphatic victory. I think none of us, although we know that usually for Real Madrid to stand out, there has to be an element of individual brilliance. None of us would have imagined that it was the Uruguay international, Federico Santiago Valverde, to inspire Real Madrid to victory. But it was him that rose out on the occasion, and he brought the glory. And by extension, he sealed a beautiful week with another goal against Sevilla. We're talking about a Real Madrid side who, in their traveling squad, have included Kylian Mbappe, who has been out for quite a bit of time through a knee injury, as well as Jude Bellingham. I think he had been out with a thigh injury or hamstring. So those are very worthy additions for them coming into this fixture. Whereas I do not imagine they will start those games, I'd want to assume that it adds to their squad strength going into the fixture. The question will then boil down to, how do both managers select their teams? First of all, if you're Pep Guardiola, I would say do not tinker with it too much. Just go with the basics. How? Gianluigi Donnarumma in goal, Matthias Nunes, Ruben Diaz, Mark Guehi. Yes, I know Mark Guehi had a nightmare of a performance at the Santiago Bernabeu, but maybe he's sort of managed to since pick himself up and and carry on. Ryan Atnori at left back. Then I'll go with Rodrigo Cascante, Bernardo Silva, Ryan Cheki, Jeremy Doku, in that sort of team. and then brought Erling Haaland and Anton Semenyo. My inclusion for Jeremy Doku is how electric and threatening he can feel. So in other words, you want to ping some of those Real Madrid defenders back, and his work rate is good. So in sort of holding them back with the threat of Semenyo and Jeremy Doku, it may give you a bit of an advantage. So let's wait and see how Pep Guardiola will choose his team. Of course, there are threats that Savinho is out with a hamstring strain. Rico Ruiz has been out with an ankle issue. Joško Vardiol suffered, it's called what? A compound fracture? Is it called a compound fracture? He suffered a fracture. Then John Stones has equally been out. On the side of Real Madrid, Raul Asensio, Ferland Mendy, Rodrigo Goes, Dani Ceballos, and Eder Militao are ruled out of this game. So, in other words, expect all the others to be available. Thibaut Courtois in goal, Anton Rudiger, Dean Hansen. I think we could see the return of Alvaro Carreras at left back. We could see Alexander Trent-Arnold at right back. A midfield of Tchouaméni, Ada Gula, Fede Valverde, and Thiago Pina, Brahim Diaz, and Vinicius Jr. In other words, Jude Bellingham, Kylian Mbappe will be starting on the bench. Real Madrid have a comfortable lead that I do not think they need to panic themselves into having or feeling the need to force Kylian Mbappe into the starting 11 and Jude Bellingham. So that's how I feel about that. Then we know that results have been overturned. You remember Deportivo La Corona, I think, overturning the 4-1 defeat against, was it against AC Milan? And then they won 4-0 to advance. Excuse me. We've seen Barcelona do it. We've seen other teams do it. The question is, can Manchester City do it? They will believe that they can do it. I just do not think they will be able to do it. I think Manchester City are going to win the fixture by 2-1 and will bow out of the competition 4-2 on aggregate score. We expect key battles. Like I said, Jeremy Doku versus Fede Valverde and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Those two will need to work hand in hand in that right back role or defending that right back position. Then Alvaro Carreras, if he's the one that starts ahead of Fran Garcia, to battle it out with Anton Semenyo, while Vinicius Jr. will be gladly taking on Matheus Nunes on the other side. And Adagula or Brahim Diaz will be drifting off to the left to give Ryan Ashnoy a run for his money. Then that midfield, for me, I feel Bernardo Silva, Rodrigo Hernandez Cascante with Ryan Cheki ahead of them, we could have quite a midfield contest that they can dominate. Not dominate enough for them to win the fixture by 4-0 or 3-0, no more time to send it to extra time and possibly penalties. But I think they can make a statement. I think Manchester City will do just enough to salvage their reputation if, and this is a big if Pep Guardiola does not play too smart to try and tinker the team to play otherwise. Because as we have seen with Pep Guardiola over the years, he has a knack of making simple things a bit complicated. He likes to challenge himself into ideas that may not be ideal for the moment. And by that, I stand to say that it's not bad to bring new ideas to the game, to think outside the box, to try and outsmart everybody else. It's not a bad thing. But every time the timing for it is not right and you get it wrong, then that's where we will criticize you for your choices. So I'll leave that at that. But I think Manchester City, it's a home game for them. Um, the one thing that Man City have to avoid is conceding an early goal or even conceding the first goal at whatever moment in the game. Because for me, even if it is goalless by the 70th minute, I believe that players still have a reason to believe. Because it could be still goalless in the 70th minute. But if Manchester City score in the 71st minute, and then maybe 78th or 80th minute, and suddenly 2-0, you'll feel the mood of the stadium shift. You'll feel the ambience of the game change. So it's in that sort of respect. But if Real Madrid get to the Etihad Stadium and score fast, then what's already a hard mountain to climb for Manchester City will almost feel like an impossible mountain to climb. And that's the significance, because that has a psychological effect to it. It's like going to war. If you go to war, I know the experts say that every plan of a war goes to shit or is forgotten as soon as the first bullet is fired. But we know that if you go to war and the first person you lose is your general in the war, that's going to have a psychological effect on all your other soldiers or fighters. So in Man City conceding the first goal against Real Madrid, it will be like them losing a general as the first culprit of the battle. So they would want to avoid that. Then quickly, let's move on to Chelsea versus PSG. My views about that game are not any different from that I've held about Manchester City. By extension, you remember I started off by saying I would want the Champions League to offer us a little bit of drama, a little bit of emotions, nail-biting moments. Depending on what side of the bench you sit on as a fan, you may not wish it on your own team, and I do not wish it on your team. Or my team. But I don't want it to be so straightforward. That becomes boring. You see how the fixture between Bayern Munich and Atlanta is so straightforward, because Bayern Munich went and obliterated Atlanta, winning by 6-1 in the first leg. Even with all their goalkeeping questions, I do not think that even in a world that believes in miracles, imaginations, wishes, and assumptions have imagined a scenario where Inter Milan go to the Allianz Arena and win it 5-0 in normal time to extend it to extra time. I do not think we've deluded ourselves into thinking that far ahead or imagining that situation. So in other words, in any case, whichever way you slice it, and I saw a very good Bayern Munich side when they were down to 10 men following the sending of Nicholas Jackson against Bayer Leverkusen, it's almost a given that Bayern Munich are going to go through. Even if that game ends goalless, even if they were to lose 2-1, even if they were to lose 2-0, they still go through anyway. And I do not imagine that that's going to be the case. But it's so straightforward. You get my point. Like, there's no anticipation about it. There's no hope that something different is going to happen about it. Unless you're a Bayern Munich fan, that you're looking, and even if you're a Bayern Munich fan, you're simply looking forward to watching your team play another game of football that could almost pass for a formality. In any case, if the rules will permit it, Atalanta may as well just forfeit the game and simply say, give them 3 goals and we move on. That's how it feels like. It may not play out entirely that way, but that's how it feels like. That's given. So, Chelsea versus PSG. The first leg that Chelsea lost by 5-2, Kivica Kvaratskhelia scoring a brace in that one, Ousmane Dembele, Vitinha, and Bradley Barcola for PSG, while Malo Gusto and Enzo Fernandez were on target for Chelsea, is a kind of game as beautiful as any game of football that you love to watch. For 70 minutes, Chelsea did all the right things. That even when they went a goal down through Bradley Bacola, I was not worried about them. I was simply waiting for them to score and restore parity. And indeed, it wasn't too far long down the line that they did through Malo Gusto. Then they conceded again through Ousmane Dembele. But even then, they were still playing well enough that I was simply waiting for that second goal for Chelsea to come. Fortunately for them, it did come in the second half through Enzo Fernandez, with Pedro Neto providing the assist. So, might I mention that my prediction going into that very fixture had been a 2-2 draw. So at 2-2, I'm thinking to myself, this is the kind of game I predicted. It's playing out exactly how I imagined it will play out. And then, as soon as the draw was made, I remember I said, I would trust Chelsea to get over or to get past PSG over a course of 2 legs. And that was based on a number of factors that I sort of put down. And it did feel that way, even at that point when the game was 2-2. Because PSG had not been playing well, particularly in the Champions League and across all competitions. They were wanting in their own performances. Their victories were not convincing. In any case, in the last 6 Champions League games, but in the last 5 Champions League games prior to facing Chelsea, they had only won 1 fixture. They had had 2 draws, actually 3 draws against Bilbao, Newcastle, and Monaco in the reverse fixture of the playoffs by 2-2. They had lost 1, losing to Sporting Lisbon by 2-1, and that was still at the league phase. And then they had 1-1, beating up against Monaco in the first leg of the playoffs by 3-2, for which they needed to come from 2 goals down. So I really imagined a PSG side that did not just have enough in their tank to get past Chelsea. And it's not because I had forgotten that PSG had a revenge plot to accomplish against Chelsea, who had beaten them in the finals of the FIFA Club World Cup back in the summer of 2025 in the USA. I was not oblivious to that. But like I said, they were not playing good enough or well enough for me to be convinced that they'll do a number on Chelsea. But as is the case with football, you get punished on your mistakes. And after the 70th minute mark, Chelsea had a drop-off, and that drop-off was punished. It was largely a drop-off in concentration. The third goal that Vitinha scores against them, they tried to play out from the back. The goalkeeper, Felipe Jansson, plays a blind pass that is intercepted by Bradley Bacola. Ball goes to Kivica Kvaratskhelia, who then passes it to Vitinha. Bang! 3-2. Then they relax. Again, drop off in concentration. They fail to close down Kivica Kvaratskhelia, and he does Kivica Kvaratskhelia things. The 25-year-old Georgian international strikes the ball swiftly and sweetly beyond the reach of Felipe Jansson, and it's 4-2. As if that wasn't enough, they let Achraf Hakimi go on a scintillating counter-attack, play the cutback, and Kivica Kvaratskhelia is there to tap it in, for which I thought the goalkeeper would have done enough to keep that ball out, but he never did. So, and then it finishes 5-2 in favor of PSG. PSG did not play a game of football over the weekend in the French Ligue 1 because they had that fixture that they were supposed to play rescheduled so that they can better prepare for this fixture. That is the significance, and that's the kind of advantage sometimes these kinds of teams get. In other leagues, like the Italian Serie A or the Spanish La Liga and the German Bundesliga, you may not get the game moved entirely to a different match day or different play day. But usually they will bring your fixtures earlier than ordinarily would be the case to give you a bit of an advantage. Because you need the advantage, even if it means an extra day of resting time or preparation time for you to face an opponent. It could turn out to be the difference in the contest. So we know Chelsea played on Saturday, while PSG were about preparing for this game. The same way, I do not imagine that Manchester City are going to beat Real Madrid by 3-0 without Real Madrid scoring. Is the same way I cannot imagine it for Chelsea. Whereas there's evidence that they've done it before against PSG, as I've previously mentioned in the finals of the FIFA Club World Cup, this Chelsea backline has been very unconvincing. Yes, they've had, I think, about 9 or 10 clean sheets in the Premier League this season. I just do not see them, how they keep a clean sheet. And failing to keep a clean sheet is what downs them. But again, for Chelsea, the prayer will be the same as is the prayer with Manchester City. Regardless of how the game plays out or starts, the last thing you want is conceding an early goal, later on the first goal, in any form or shape. Because, football is crazy. It can be goalless in 80 minutes, and then suddenly it has 4 goals in a space of 10, 12 minutes. That's how crazy football can be. So that's why I say, for as long as you're yet to concede and you still believe, there could still be a chance for you. Whether you capitalize on that chance, that's up to you. But the last thing Chelsea want is to go a goal down early against PSG. And yet, defensively, they've not painted themselves as solid enough to convince me that they will manage to keep a clean sheet, that they will avoid conceding. First and foremost, for starters, it's a bit unfortunate for Chelsea because they lost their captain, Richie James, to a hamstring injury. Jamie Gittens still out. Felipe Jorgensen apparently has a groin injury. Willian Esteval has been out for quite some time with the hamstring injury. Levi Colwill is back training, but I do not know or think he's fully fit enough to play. Malo Gusto had a knock, but Mykhailo Mudryk is almost a forgotten figure in Chelsea colors, even though I never forget him personally. So in other words, the point I'm trying to make is that without their captain, who I think would be a good fit for that right back role, that's a bit of a punch in the gut. But we can also not dwell on spilled milk. Robert Sanchez in goal is expected. Marco Correa at left back. Trevor Chalobah and Wesley Fofana in that back, double center back roles. And then it will be Malo Gusto or Joshua Achepong at right back, depending on who is available to start. Then Andre Santos alongside Moises Caicedo in midfield. Ahead of them, I'd go with Enzo Fernandez, Cole Palmer to one side, Pedro Neto on the other, and Joao Pedro to lead the lines. Is that Chelsea team good enough to beat up against PSG? I'm not particularly too sold on that idea. However, they do have the home advantage. With the pace of Pedro Neto, the execution of Enzo Fernandez, and if Joao Pedro can bring his A game, they can have a chance. How big a chance? A chance to win the game, but not to go through, in my opinion. Because I do not envision a world where it's a 3-0 victory for Chelsea or a 4-1 or a 4-0 victory for them to go straight through. Because what essentially a 3-0 victory in normal time means is that the game goes into extra time, and if scoreline remains the same, it possibly goes to penalties. It's only a 4-0 victory for them that takes them straight through without needing to play extra time. So I cannot envision that. On the side of PSG, Matevi Safanov will be in goal. Willian Pacho, Marquinhos, Akraf Hakimi, Nuno Mendes, Vitinha, Joao Neves, Warren Zaire-Emery, Bradley Bacola, Ousmane Dembele, and Desile Doué, or Kivicha Kvaratskhelia, depending on how Luis Enrique chooses to start that one. Because it's only Fabian Ruiz that is absent as far as those reliable players are concerned. So PSG have a better well-off squad in terms of player availability than Chelsea can save for themselves, because you have the Sene Mayu, Gokalo Ramos, all waiting. Lee Kang-in, Ibrahim Baye, all waiting on the sidelines for that PSG side. Theo Hernandez and things like that. So How does this play out? Could Chelsea win? I swear I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that Chelsea will win this game. It's one that could end in a draw or even in defeat. So I'll go to draw or a 3-2 victory for PSG. That's how I envision it. Moving on quickly, because time is catching up on us. Sporting CP against Bodo Glimt. Having suffered a 3-0 defeat in the first leg, I'm one of those that had underestimated the process of Bodo Glimt because I did not think they would win the game that comfortably. That Sporting CP would make it easy for them because Hel Rui Silva did not have the best of days in office. Ousmane Diomande, Goncalo Inacio, Maximiliano Araujo, Ivan Fresneda, that's the backline for Sporting CP. Joao Pedro Smoes in midfield, Morten Gelmand, Francesco Trincao, Luis Suarez, very capable players. But there's an effectiveness with which that Bodo Glimt side plays. And I just do not see how Sporting CP go through. In fact, have a sneaky feeling that they could do a double on them as well. That Bodo Glimt go over in Sporting Lisbon and win the game by 2-1. Those two guys, Jens Haig and Kasper Ho, as well as Ole Didac Bloomberg, that front three is so lethal because the likes of Patrick Bag in that midfield. So without dwelling too much on that fixture, I envision maybe Bodo Glimt winning by 2-1. And lastly, in as far as the UEFA Champions League is concerned, tonight is Arsenal. We've spoken about Arsenal at the start of this video, although in a bit of a different context. They've come up against a well-drilled Bayer Leverkusen side who, based on their performance from the first leg, had done tremendous homework to face the Gunners. And I still think they're going to carry the same spirit into today's fixture. Over the weekend, we saw Urian Timber go off for the Arsenal through injury and was substituted for Christian Mosquera in the first half. But prior to that, unfortunately, Mikel Arteta does not watch the Football Tribe UG channel. So he never gets the message when I try to send it to him. But perhaps those that hear it and transmit it beyond the airwaves that I may be accustomed to or that may be known to me. I told guys that Mikel Arteta was going to play Urian Timber into an injury. And it manifested over in that Everton game. I have a feeling, and I hope I'm wrong. I have a feeling, but I hope I'm not wrong, that the same fate awaits for Declan Rice and Martin Zubimendi. That until they are injured, he's not going to change them. He's not going to give them a rotation. He's not going to give them a rest. And that, I mean, staying out of a match day or not starting a game. Forget him doing it in the FA Cup game, because that's almost a given, you know? So for me, it was an I told you so moment when Urian Timber went off through injury. And therefore is not available to feature in today's game. Nor is their captain in Martin Odegaard. However, the Belgian forward, Leandro Trossard, has returned. First of all, I would not want to see Mikel Arteta do the kind of thing that he did over the weekend when he started with Noni Madueke to the left and Bukayo Saka to the right, because I felt that Noni Madueke struggled on the left because every time he drifted on the inside to take a shot, he largely found himself on his weaker foot, which is the right foot. And that's why he had, I think, one shot or one attempt on goal in the first half, and that was blocked out. And in the second half, prior to being withdrawn, the only time he goes to a brilliant dribble cutting through Everton players was when he drifted to the right. I said this, and I'll say it before. Sorry, I said this, and I'll say it again. Over the weekend, in that game against Everton, I kept waiting to see players in Ebelechi Eze, Bukayo Saka, and Noni Madueke switch things up on their own for Madueke to move to the right, Saka to move centrally, Ebelechi Eze to go to the left. But it never happened. If I was Mikel Arteta, I would start with Noni Madueke in this game, and I would keep Bukayo Saka on the bench. At least let Madueke come and start the first 1 hour, first 55 minutes, regardless. Because he's been a bit of a flashlight in those dull Arsenal games. And the first leg, if anything, the first leg is anything to go by. We saw how he gave Arsenal a bit of an advantage, a shift in how they went on about their game when he came on. So in terms of a predicted lineup, David Ryan goal, William Saliba, Gabriel Magalhaes, Pierre Hincapié, who started on the bench over the weekend behind Ricardo Carafiori, will return to the starting 11 to face his bosses because he's only on loan to Arsenal. And then Christian Mosquera, I do suspect, would start at right back, even though it would be my humble preference that Ben White starts because of what he offers Arsenal going forward. Then midfield, nothing changes. Rice, Zubimendi. However, I'll be of the view that you go with Declan Rice, Kai Havertz, and Ebelechi Eze. That's my view. And then you have Noni Madueke to the side, Gabriel Martinelli on the other, and Victor Gyökeres. Or if you're going to go with Martin Zubimendi, Declan Rice, go with Kai Havertz behind Victor Gyökeres, go with Eze to the left, and Madueke to the right. I do not think that's what Mikel Arteta will do, but I do feel it's what he should do. Obviously, he's done more homework on his opponent than I have done, but nonetheless, I am sold on my views when it comes to those desirable changes. Then on the side of Bayer Leverkusen, Patrick Schick is back, and that presents a nightmare of its own. So I expect to see Patrick Schick, Malik Tillman, Ibrahim Maza, Alex Grimaldo, Alexia Garcia, Esquiel Palacios, Ernest Poku, Edmond Tapsoba, Robert Anrichi was the man of the match from the first leg, and Jarell Quansah with Janis Blaszczykowski in goal. That's the kind of team that you should expect from Bayer Leverkusen. Unfortunately for them, they lost Martin Terrier over the weekend for that hard tackle from Nicholas Jackson. Arthur Lloyd Bade, Mark Flecken, the goalkeeper, Lucas Vasquez, Else Bensage are all out through injury. While for Arsenal, Martin Odegaard, Mikel Merino, and Julian Timber are absentees. So it's a must-win game for the Arsenal. They have been quite very disciplined at the Emirates this season in the UEFA Champions League, because I think they've only conceded 3 goals at home, 1 against Bayern Munich and 2 against Kairat Almaty. So they have a very good, decent record at home. However, given their struggles in the first leg, I do not anticipate that the game in terms of overall play is going to be much different from what we saw in the first leg. Nonetheless, I do anticipate that Arsenal will be just effective enough to win this game of football by 2-1 or by 3-1, and then advance to the quarterfinals. That's my prediction, or that's my vision, or what I envision for that match playing out. So we'll have to wait and see how the Gunners behave. But if I'm Mikel Arteta, those are the kinds of changes I'm making. I wouldn't want him to even think for a second that he can preoccupy his mind with what's to come next weekend in the EFL Cup final. No, it's Champions League, get the business done, and then you can move on to the other thing. So on the bench, they can have the likes of Max Dorman, Christian Nogat, among others. The captain, Martin Odegaard, etc., etc. But for me, I think Arsenal will be just effective enough to see out a victory. It won't be easy, but I do trust that they will get it over the line. Anyways, allow me to wrap it up here. It's been a wonderful morning discussion with you guys. Thank you so much, TT Vision, for having been part of the broadcast. Thank you so much, Prime Ronaldo and Pressing Kosi, for having been part of the discussion this beautiful morning. Allow me to wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Let's catch up next time. That is at night for the watch along for those games. But do not forget, there's an early kickoff in today's fixtures. That game coming at 8:45 p.m. between Bodo Glimt and Sporting CP. So stay blessed, and I'll see you guys tonight. Bye-bye for now.